I'd like to thank everybody for coming along tonight. Thanks to my colleagues who are here and to many friends from the Northeast and the Northwest, and to my family too. Thanks to my son Michael for helping me out with the PowerPoint slides tonight. Any students who are present will notice a little improvement in my normal standard PowerPoint, but look, if anything goes wrong, Michael, it's your fault. Thanks to Edgehill University. It's been a great place to work for 17 years, and it's been great to see us all progress from a lowly college of higher education to the University of the Year nominated. So most of all, though, I really want to thank Debbie, my partner. We met at Manchester University 27 years ago. I was presenting a paper on a class on, as I remember, the political economy of apartheid in South Africa. And I was stabbing away with a pen in my hand for dramatic effect, and the pen flew out of my hand, spiraled across the classroom, and landed at her feet. She calmly picked up the pen, probably rolled her eyes a little, walked across the room and handed it back to me. I looked up a bit embarrassed, and the rest is history. So I owe her everything. I choose to talk about Primo Levi tonight for three reasons. First, it's a tribute to my late father, Robert Johnson. He fought through North Africa, Sicily, and up the boot of Italy to Rome, a British soldier fighting alongside his American comrades to free a European people from totalitarianism. My father was born in 1919, the same year as Primo Levi, and in 1943 they both found themselves fighting against totalitarianism in Italy, in the British 8th Army and in the Justice and Liberty Partisan Brigades, respectively. My father is gone, but his Italy star is not. So it's here tonight, so that's for him. My father didn't really hold with going to university, so I must say a word of thanks to my late mother Marjorie, who fought for me to have that chance. He may have been the ex-soldier, but she won that battle. Actually, it wasn't much of a battle. He's going to university, and that's that. Kind of settled the matter, really. But if it was not for my mum, I wouldn't be here tonight. Second, it's a tribute to Norman Gerras, my friend, my old tutor from Manchester University, and one of the co-authors of the Euston Manifesto. Without embarrassing him too much, I want to acknowledge a debt and to say that I've learned more from Norm's work and from his example than from anyone else, and not least from his writings on political philosophy after the Holocaust. Third, the subject does form part of a wider international project to renew progressive politics, as Marx said. This has involved creating and editing a journal, Democratiya, writing a new collection, Global Politics Since 9/11, is being published by the Foreign Policy Centre soon, helping to write a political manifesto, the Euston Manifesto, and working with the Democrats in Iraq, especially in the Iraqi trade unions, as they emerge from their totalitarian experience. Okay, so who was Primo Levi? He was born in Turin in 1919 in the city's Jewish community. He grew up a kind of very shy and very intelligent boy. In late 1943, as a 24-year-old chemist, he was captured while fighting with the anti-fascist resistance during World War II. As a Jew, he was sent to the death camp of Auschwitz. 650 Jews went with him in that train, and he was one of 20 or so to return. 1.1 million people were murdered in Auschwitz, 1 million were Jews. His knowledge as a chemist saved his life. He became a slave labourer in Auschwitz III, the Monowitz camp in the Buna rubber factory. His experience gave him an intense need to testify. I had a torrent of things to tell the civilized world, he said. I felt the tattooed number on my arm burning like a sore. And for the next 42 years, he did write about his experiences and reflected on the phenomenon of totalitarianism in a series of quite remarkable books, essays, stories, novels, poetry. His most famous book is, as Marx said, If This Is a Man, an account of his time in Auschwitz, written after his return to Turin. That book was hailed as one of the century's truly necessary books by the novelist Philip Roth. The same writer found in Levi's thought what I hope I shall bring out tonight, which is we find not just the memory of the unbearable, but also his delight in what made the world exquisite to him. Levi died in 1987, almost certainly by suicide, a complicated subject outside of the scope of this talk. The title means gold from dung. One biographer, Carol Anshier, claimed that Levi had salvaged a wealth of human understanding from the ashes of Auschwitz. My claim tonight is that Levi also mined a wealth of political understanding. So when I claim that Levi's thought can help us politically, today, what do I mean? Well, let's begin with something Levi said about how each of us develops our own personal philosophy of life, our rule book on how to live it. He said, "No one is born with a ready-made rule book, rather we all build our own in the wake of our experiences or those of others we've taken in." What I will suggest tonight is that not just individuals, but societies too need such a rule book. We need what the communitarian thinker Michael Sandel called a public philosophy. The broad ideals we live by, the values that guide us, the models we are inspired by, our learnt habits of heart and mind, all of these ultimately shape our political institutions, our politicians and the policies they pursue far more, I think, than think tanks and policy wonks. Primo Levi, I suggest, as a theorist of totalitarianism, supplies elements that are wanted, in other words lacking, in the public philosophy of liberal democratic societies such as our own, who, in my opinion, once again face a totalitarian foe. We can't, of course, draw any particular policy from Levy's work, and I don't look to him for that. But I do think he can help us to do the two things we have to do simultaneously today, which is defend ourselves and preserve our values. I've framed the reading of Levi in terms of these long words, totalitarianism and anti-totalitarianism. Totalitarianism refers to the experience of Italian fascism, German Nazism, and Russian Stalinism, most obviously. Regimes that sought a total control of the individual in the name of an ideology and through the mechanism of state control and terror. I would define the Baathism of Saddam's Iraq and the more radical currents of Islamism as variations. Anti-totalitarianism means far more than simply opposing those things. It means a complete rethink, a complete renovation, as the French political writer Pierre Saint-Vallon said, of the meaning of the political, taking the recognition of totalitarianism as your point of departure. So a rethink of politics and of ethics in light of the catastrophe. But I don't want to make the case for those terms tonight, and I think you'll be able to relate to the lecture whether or not you want to share that frame. Some will prefer to think about these things in terms of gross abuse of human rights, crimes against humanity, and so on. What am I going to say tonight? In Levi, I find a warning, a hope, and an invitation. In part one of the lecture, the warning, he thinks of us as centaurs, half man, half animal, tangles of flesh and spirit, ill-constituted creatures whose civilization is much more fragile than we think, and evil is a reality. Auschwitz happened so it can happen again. That's his warning. Part two of the lecture, more hopeful. We can protect ourselves against ourselves, he says. We can strap on, if you like, a suit of armor, what he calls moral and political armature or protection as a society, I think as a global society, in order to ward off the danger that it could happen again. So in part two, I discuss the need to witness, to reason, to judge, to fight, to put cruelty first, and to promote democracy. And I suggest that in these ways, Levi offers us a politics of hope in the shadow of catastrophe. In part three of the lecture, the invitation, I mentioned before that Philip Roth said that Primo Levi found life exquisite, and I think Levi invites us to do the same. So part one, the warning. Levi helps us to reread politics, as Robert Fine said, through a lens darkened by Auschwitz. And I think we need that darkened lens. We just escaped from the most murderous century in human history by the skin of our teeth. The facts are such that we could even feel a kind of species shame. Death by organised violence in the 20th century amounted to between 167 and 188 million people. 58 million people in World War II alone. 16 conflicts had over 1 million victims. During World War II, the Nazis murdered 6 million Jews, an event known variously as the Holocaust, not a term Levi liked, or the Shoah, or the Nazi genocide. Also killed by the Nazis were 220,000 Sinti and Roma, along with many others considered racially inferior or undesirable, including mentally or physically disabled Germans. The scale of killing perpetrated by that other form of totalitarianism, communism, or Stalinism, if you prefer, is also difficult to take in. What does Levi want to say to us about this, to us his readers? Simply this: it happened, therefore it can happen again, he says. Few countries can be considered immune. It is therefore necessary to sharpen our senses.